Good evening, everyone. I think it's still loading. Good evening, everyone. How are you? Welcome to Blind Tasting Tuesday at Angelina's Ristorante. I hope everyone's doing well and has had a nice week so far. We're really looking forward to tonight's presentation. And so we are going to get ready to go here. And I'm sorry we got logged on late. We were having some technical issues. I don't think it was on our end. I think it was with Facebook itself. So, all right. So again, welcome to our Blind Tasting Tuesdays. This is the first one of these that we're doing here at Angelina's. I'm Dinah Leach, the wine director and sommelier here at Angelina's. For those of you who don't know me, but I feel probably everybody that's on we are very familiar with. I did want to just make an announcement to everyone. Angelina's will be back open, the restaurant, on Thursday. If you'd like to make a reservation, you can call our telephone number at 239-390-3187. We're very, very excited to get to see all of you again. We've been missing seeing everyone's faces. However, you won't be seeing but half of ours because we're all going to be wearing masks and gloves. While we've been closed, we've completely cleaned and sanitized the restaurant from stem to stern. And in fact, as you can see behind me, we've removed some of the tables to comply with the 25% occupancy order. Yeah, so it's going to be a very different time, but we have tried to figure out how we're going to socially distance and make everybody safe and secure. And so we think we've come up with a really great plan, and we can't wait to see all of you again. So again, if you'd like to call and make a reservation, we're still going to be doing the delivery and curbside carry out for the near future. And as things progress and change, we will try and keep all of you up to date. Okay, so one of the first things I want to talk about is why do we blind taste as sommeliers? So I can tell you what we're doing right now is what all the local sommeliers here in Fort Myers and Naples, we get together usually every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, and we blind taste here at Angelina's. The wines are bagged so that we don't know what they are, and then we pour them out. The only difference being is that we taste 6 wines. We usually do 3 white and 3 red. And we follow this grid that I gave you from the Court of Master Sommeliers, because that way it gives it great structure and you're hitting all of your things that you should be thinking about and tasting. Reason we do this is because when we then come to you at a table, we have a fairly good idea of how to describe the wine to you. So if I've never tasted Sauvignon Blanc, I can read what it tastes like on a sheet of paper, but it's not the same as drinking it or drinking, and that's not the same as, say, drinking 20 different types of Sauvignon Blanc or drinking 200, I shouldn't say drinking, I should say tasting, but sometimes it's drinking. We generally, so that we have a comparison basis and find what all the similarities are for a particular region, and then what may be some of the outliers. And so for when we do our blind tasting practice, we generally try to stick to classic producers, classic examples of a wine. We're not doing these like natural wines and blind tasting. It's something very classic. And so in your packet, I want to go over what the packet is. And so I had given you your instruction sheet. And so hopefully you've got your wines open and in front of you and ready to go. And yum, yum, okay. But so I had included, there's a sheet that lists the testable grape varietals for the certified sommelier examination. And this is run through the Court of Master Sommeliers. And let me just give you a little bit of background about that. They're a certifying body here and throughout the world that tests and checks knowledge for different levels of sommelier. And so you start out with there's 4 different levels. You start out with the introductory sommelier, And the students there go for 2 days of classes, and at the end of the second day, they take an exam, and then they have passed that exam. They have 3 years to take their certified sommelier examination, and you go, and that is strictly a test. There is no classes or anything like that with it. You take theory, you blind taste 4 wines, and then you do a service portion where they check your skills and how you are on the floor. And then when you pass that, you head on to the advanced sommelier, and that is a 3-day examination. And I can tell you it's very rigorous. You do theory, blind tasting, and service as well for those. But boy, they really ratchet that up a notch. And then the final certification is the Master Sommelier level. And this is the most rigorous exam in the world. The pass rate for this is less than 5% of any of the testees that take it. Sometimes there have been as little as 1 or 2 Master Somms pass in a year. And this is the world over. And then sometimes there's a little more, but it's not very much. In fact, right now, I think we're about at 265 master sommeliers in the world. More people have been to the moon than there are master sommeliers. There are more heads of state than there are master sommeliers. So it is a very prestigious title. But so this is their examinable list of white and red varieties for that exam. So don't expect to see something like Friday night's Grillo on the exam. It won't be there. And so these are the only possibilities you have for your white wines and for your red wines that we've got before you today. And since this is the first one, I'm not trying to mess you up or anything like that, because we kind of need to go through what the process is. And in your packet, I've also included, we have the CMS deductive tasting language chart. And this is kind of helpful too, because as human beings, we don't really use our noses for much. We might if we are cooks in the kitchen, but we don't think about what all the different smells are and that sort of thing. And so I have lots of our guests say to me all the time that, oh, you must be just a natural born taster. And I explain that is not the case for anybody. In fact, every master sommelier there is will tell you that tasting does not come easily, because it's very difficult, because from birth we just don't use our noses. Unlike dogs, it's nose first, then ears, and then eyes. We're eyes first and ears and taste, and yeah, nose comes like dead last. So we have to kind of train ourselves. And so the next sheet that I had for you was the wine wheel. And this was my aha moment for wine tasting, because I was always a beer drinker. And if I had wine, whether it be white or red, I like it or I don't. And that's all the further I could get. I could never figure out what these people were talking about, saying about, oh, this smells like strawberries and cherries, and but it smells like white wine and it smells like red wine. And so I had gone to staff training where our general manager in the restaurant at that time, she had this wine wheel laying there. So I'm like, and I'm a big list maker, so I'm like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense to me. So you start at the center of the wheel, and so if you get something like under fruity, the category fruity, okay, yeah, it smells fruity, all right. And then you kind of work your way out. What kind of fruit is it? Is it citrus fruit? Is it berry fruit? Is it apple, like pomaceous fruit? Is it stone fruit? What kind of fruit is this? And then if you can put your finger on that, then you can fan yourself out even further on the wheel and say, oh, it smells like lemon and white grapefruit. And then you can take it to shades of whatever beyond that. If you want to say, instead of just pear, that, oh, this is Bosc pear, or something more exotic. But this tasting language chart, this used to be my husband's grocery list, because he's the one that goes to the grocery store. And so he would be like, I don't know what a quince is. And I'm like, well, ask the guy, point to quince, because I don't know what it tastes like, or, and I need to be tasting these things so that I can pinpoint different flavors. So just pay attention as you smell things and as you eat things. What do they really taste like? And so to the people that say, nah, you're a natural born taster, I just always try to tell people, imagine the smell of a lemon. If you picked up a fresh lemon that you just picked off the tree, you can conjure up what a lemon smells like, or what bacon, like the frying bacon that wakes you up in the morning and you can't wait to get your feet out onto the floor from the bed. You can imagine what bacon smells like. And so it's just figuring out what all those other kind of aromas are. And so then the final sheet, and the one that we will be working off of, is the deductive tasting grid. And every sommelier throughout the world knows this grid by heart, because in order to pass exams, you kind of have to hit every kind of checkbox. We're not going to go through each one of these individually today. I don't imagine that would maybe be so much fun, but we are going to talk about some of the things. And so as you can see from this chart, it's broken down into sight, nose, palate. And palate has like 2 subsections. And then we do an initial conclusion and a final conclusion. Because basically, we're going to treat ourselves tonight like we are police detectives, okay? And we're on Law and Order. I wish I had the dank dank sound to go behind it. But, and so we have to find all the clues in this wine that it has to tell us, to point us to what we're going to make for our final conclusion. And so the initial conclusion is kind of where you're still maybe ruling out some suspects and really honing into what it might be. And so again, I think if I were you, I would have my little testable list of the white grape varietals that I could possibly have been mean enough to have put into your glass. And so we're going to talk generally about some of these things, and we're going to go ahead and get started with wines 1, 2, and 3. And I hope everybody's bags were numbered. If not, wine number 1 was the wine that had the green foil seal up at the top. Wine number 2 had the cream-colored foil, and wine number 3 has the burgundy-colored foil. So just in case we somehow missed that, I hope not. And also, too, I forgot to mention in your packet that please, when you open the wines, try not to look at the corks, because sometimes the producer or the vintage might be on the cork, and so you just want to look away, because it's more fun and more instructive if you have no idea kind of what's in your glass. I would please encourage all of you to ask questions, because when you all ask me questions, I'm always like, I want to do the palm to the forehead kind of thing, like, durr, I should have talked about that and I missed it. And so it really helps, I think, to flesh out some of the things that we surely do not want to miss. And also, as we go along, please don't type in the little comment sidebar what you think the wine is, because the minute in our blind tasting group that somebody pipes up and says what they think the wine is, all of a sudden everybody around the table thinks the exact same thing. And so we don't want to cloud anybody's judgment. And once I reveal the wine, then you can say that you thought it was Sauvignon Blanc, or that it was Cabernet Sauvignon, or whatever it may be, because we don't want to prejudice anyone first and foremost. So looking at the actual grid itself, this deductive tasting format, it's the Psalms, the slang is, it's the grid. Do you have the grid memorized? And what did you get on the grid? Yeah, so you're all now hip and cool Psalms that can say they tasted using the grid. Okay. So everybody thinks like nose and palate are what are really going to lead you to a wine, and that, oh, I always get golden delicious apple and Chardonnay, and so that always tells me that Chardonnay. Well, that might be if you're having Chardonnay, but what if you're having a varietal that's similar to that, or you get a Chardonnay that doesn't have golden delicious yellow apple? Then what do you do? Because you pinned all your hopes and dreams on that one thing. And so usually we like to have at least 3 things in a wine that point us to what the wine might be. And there will be some like stick out kind of clues for things like, and the cool hip Psalms, we call those banker wines, because you put your nose in the glass and you're just like, now I know what that is, because it has this certain chemical aroma to it. And by the way, anything that we smell in a wine is produced either from the yeast or is inherent to the grape itself. And there's all these, like, some of the other somms make fun of me because I'm all into the chemistry and, you know, like thiols and pyrazines and mercaptans and guaiacol and just all these other things. But I find it fascinating because that's actually what gives certain aromas and flavors to the wines. And so there are certain chemical properties that are in certain wines that if you smell them, it can only be that one thing. There's also other clues too, based on your palate and the things we like to talk about as structure, and we'll get to that shortly. But those will help you very much to figure out what the wine is, and then also the condition of the fruit is very important. So and it's not how it tastes when you put it in your mouth; it's how it finishes on the palate. Is it tart or is it ripe? And what this helps, the fruit condition helps with, is to figure out whether it's old world or new world. Old world tends to finish with tart fruit, and new world tends to finish with riper fruit. And so those are just some little helpful clues. We're going to start out with sight because sight is so often overlooked, and it's very, very, to me, it gives a lot of great clues about wine. All right. So you can look, in fact, grabbing up your glass, I did include a blank piece of paper so that in case you've got a black tablecloth or something, that you can use this white background. You're going to just have it on the table, and you're going to want to just tip your wine like at a 45-degree angle. I asked all of you to put the same amount of wine, or try to, in each glass, because then you've got a fair playing field. If you only put like a half an ounce of wine in one glass and 3 ounces of wine in the next glass, the one that has 3 ounces is going to look deeper in color than the one with a half ounce. And so you really want to be able to judge your sight and all of these things very clearly. So looking here at wine number one, we see the very first thing is clarity, visible sediment. This wine is very clear. If I put my finger underneath and look through the top, like the top of the glass down onto the white paper background, I can easily see my finger. There's no haziness to it or turbidity. And so this wine is a clear wine. And so then by concentration, they're referring to, like if you think about making beef stock, all right? And so you put it into the pot and it's very thin. And if you were to put it in this wine glass, you could probably see your finger through it. But as it cooks down, it gets more concentrated. And the longer you cook it down, the thicker it gets, the denser it gets. And if I take the final concentration of that and put it into this wine glass, I probably can't see my finger through it. So that's one way to describe concentration. So not super concentrated, right? It's almost in color is also very important. And for white wines, you just need to worry about three things. And let's see, yeah. So on here, they've got four, but really water white is very, very infrequent. You have straw, yellow, and gold. And so gold is where it takes on that kind of burnished cast to the wine. Yellow would be the color of yellow, like a yellow legal pad. And then straw, which I kind of feel this wine to be, is very straw colored. And then we also talk about rim variation, because rim variation is the difference between when you look through the deepest part of the bowl of the glass and you head out to the very rim of it. How does that color change? Does it fade? Is there a thin rim? Is there a thick like rim? And so this one fades out very evenly, and we go to a very watery meniscus. It almost looks like water in the glass on the very, very edge. All right. So this may be helpful because if I've got a wine that's deep gold, color only comes from a couple things. All right. And one of those things is oak. Another one would be botrytis for like those special dessert wines from Bordeaux or certain regions where they're prone to having this rot that affects the berries. That can give color to the wine. The age of the wine can also change the color. As white wines get older, they get deeper in color. And if they're for red wines, exactly the opposite. The older red wine gets, the lighter in color it becomes. All right, so looking between, if you've got your wines in your glasses, looking between wines 1 and 2, 2 is much deeper in color and concentration than wine number 1. So, might that have some oak? Might that have some age to it? Whereas wine 1 is just very light, clear, and for some of you, I actually have a little bit of gas bubbles in my glass. In fact, I wanted to introduce, I forgot, but introduce Nick Catman, who's one of our managers, and he also helps me to somm on the floor here at Angelina's. But he's kind of monitoring the questions and any comments that you have. So I'm having him help to answer some of those things. We will kind of pause between wines and see, what all I may answer for all of you. But there is a definite, and so I just wanted to ask Nick. Nick, are you getting the gas in the glass, the little bit of the spritzy looking?
I think I've swirled my bubbles away when I've been playing with the wine.
Okay, he says he thinks he's swirled his bubbles away, which definitely you can do. Oh, and I'm glad he brought that up, because for blind tasting, some of the aromas that you can find in your glass are very delicate and may disappear. So generally, like when I taste, especially when it's an exam situation, I like to stand up and actually physically bend over the glass before I've touched the glass and swirled it, because like there's a particular chemical in Riesling. I won't burden you with the long chemical name of it, but it's called TDN, and it smells like, they always say like petrol or diesel, but I live in Florida, and so for me, it smells like I've just opened a brand new pool float and I'm blowing it up, and that plasticky smell. Other people say about pencil eraser or whatever, but it's only distinct to that one grape. And sometimes if you swirl your wine, that will be gone, and then you don't have that banker wine you had sitting in front of you because you just swirled it away. So smelling them first before you swirl, because I see a lot of the people, they just grab their wines and violently swirl it all day. And speaking of which, why do we swirl wines? Okay, so that's in order for us to volatilize the esters, is the scientific term for that. What we're trying to do when you mix oxygen into the wine, it's going to release some of the flavor aromas. Now, I mentioned some of them are delicate. You don't want to swirl, so that's why I always smell first and then swirl and get after the wine. So, so I did have a little bit of spritziness to the glass, and what does that indicate? It indicates that I've either got a super youthful wine, which will be helpful later on when I have to guess the vintage, or I actually have a full-on sparkling wine. And as you can see from the testable grape varietals, it's not a full-on sparkling wine. So I'm looking at something that's a still wine that has some youth to it. So I have not even, well, I demonstrated smelling the wine, but I haven't even picked up this wine and smelled it and tasted it. And I know that this wine is youthful and that it probably has not seen oak. All right, so there's 2 good clues for me right there. Yeah, and tearing. Okay, staining is not an issue with white wine. That's when, like, we drink red wines and you swirl it and the tears come down the bowl of the glass and they completely stain the glass. I know some of you love drinking a Zinfandel, and boy, that's a chopper stainer if ever there was one. And so that definitely stains the glass. We mentioned about the gas, and then tearing is something. I think there's something of a misnomer about tearing or legs on the glass. The longer the legs, the higher the quality of the wine, and that's the BS. All right, so it is all that indicates is the level of the amount of alcohol. It could also indicate that there's sugar in there, because sugar will run more slowly down the glass if there's sugar in the wine. And so, yeah, generally higher alcohol and sugar and like a couple other things, but they're not important to us here tonight. But so now, so we've looked at the wine. We've already got some good clues. We're the police detectives, right? So on to the nose we go. So we're going to want to smell the nose. And figure out, is there anything wrong with this wine? Like why I should not want to put this on into my face. And so smelling the wine, yeah, smells very pretty, very youthful. It's so things I would be looking for is this wine corked? All right, and boy, I get asked all the time, well, what's a corked wine taste like? Oh, it's obnoxious, and you can't untaste it once you've tasted it. In fact, when I've had a corked wine before, I've tasted even still the next day. It affects everything you eat. Yeah, it's not a pleasant smell. It smells like damp, moldy, wet cardboard, like a wet dog, probably a wet, dirty dog. And it is just not something you want to deal with at all. And I know it lists here a couple other things, like a volatile acidity that it's like where when you smell the wine, it actually burns your nose hairs up here because the alcohol may be so high and intense. It's almost like nail polish remover or something like that. Um, as far as yeah, Britannomyces, we call this Brett, and that's where the wine smells like dirty barn or even horse manure or a dirty, sweaty saddle or something like that. And some songs like it and some don't. In fact, it's funny when I do the staff training here at Angelina's. I have one server that she is just so hates Brett, and other people find it in small amounts pleasing. It adds complexity to the wine, so you have to be aware sometimes of how you know uh, sensitive you are to some of these compounds. Another thing that's very important to notice is this wine oxidized. And so oxidation tends to give it kind of a staler feel on the nose. I feel like this one's, I said it was youthful, but because it's so exuberant and it jumps out of the glass and it's just this fresh fruit. And so I'm not getting any indication of aging. So something that might give me some aging on a wine would be like, does it smell like old newspaper? And then two, some of the fruits, instead of being youthful and fresh, take on more of a raisinated character. So like if I smelled mandarin orange in a wine and an older wine, the same wine, it could smell more like it had been a dried orange or even to orange peel or something like that. So again, we need to figure out, we said this was youthful, no faults. And so how intense is this? It's funny, when I poured this wine for Nick and I earlier, I was probably about 2 feet away from it and I could smell it. I didn't have to put my nose anywhere near the glass. I could smell it. It's just very powerful on the nose and just wants to jump out of the glass. And then you'll have other wines like I have to jam. I don't even have that big a nose, and I have to just jam it in there as far as I can get and swirl it to death. So to try to get anything to come out of the wine. And so different grapes have different aromatic characteristics, and we're going to be exploring some of those tonight. So we mentioned about the fruit being youthful, and um, as far as descriptions for this, I feel like there's passion fruit and white grapefruit, definitely some citrus fruit, but then there's some riper tropical fruit like this passion fruit underneath. And again, just super intense. And then the fruit, like I mentioned, it smells fresh. And the citrus fruit, we do have some tropical fruit, which would mean a little bit of a warmer climate, but we've also got citrus fruit. So kind of weird because citrus fruit would indicate like when we smell those on the nose. And in fact, let me just go ahead and talk about the fruits. So you got the fruit spectrum, right? Okay, so we've got citrus fruits, which would be the tardest, and then we go all the way to tropical fruit, which would be the ripest. And those tend to correlate with the climate they come from. So again, with your citrus fruit, maybe next I've got green apple, green pear. When you're saying green or citrus, generally indicates a cooler climate. All right. And then when I start getting into things like stone fruit and my tropical fruit, so things like banana and passion fruit and mango, melon, that sort of thing, that's a hot climate because you, in order to get fruits like that ripe, you have to be in a much warmer climate. So But this particular wine, we've described both citrus fruits, which is, underripe, and then we've got tropical fruit, which is totally ripe. So, might be a clue for this particular varietal. We'll see. So, then we try to see if there's anything other than fruit in the wine. And, okay, so earth notes, could I say that there's some crushed rock here? Sure, because I guess we got to talk about more than just fruit. But this is just a fruity wine. And then we want to figure out, is there oak on this wine? So we said based on the color, we probably didn't think so, but we're going to now kind of maybe reaffirm that judgment. And so oak, depending on what type of oak it is, French oak tends to smell very much like vanilla, cinnamon, baking spices, even you can get to like cocoa powder. And so for me, I don't smell any of those things. And so I'm going to presume that there's probably not oak on this. And then we're going to head on to the palate, because the palate is going to help drive some more of the story. And then we're going to confirm what we had on the nose. And if things change on the palate as opposed to the nose, we're going to want to note that as well. So the very first thing when you taste your wine, is it dry or is it sweet? Should be a snap decision, because you should taste it. I know that the tongue map thing has been debunked and all of that, but for those of us that grew up with the tongue map, we're used to tasting that way. So again, this is for me, because when you get to actually tasting, like we get into heated debates all the time. Well, this tastes like this, and this should have, and well, for you, because if I've never had quince, like I mentioned before, but you eat it every other day, you're much more likely to find quince in a wine than I am, because I won't know what to say about it. I'll have to describe it some other way. So you have to find out what descriptors and what things work for you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put the wine into our face. All right. All right. So I'm here, and immediately I decided whether I thought the wine was dry or sweet. Okay. And one thing we need to clear up is a lot of times I have people say, well, they don't say it, but they think it, because when we buy fruit, at the local market or the grocery store, you expect fruit to have some sweetness. So like those strawberries, if you bite into one and it's tart, you're going to be taking those back. All right, and going, what are you serving me? But when it's bright and red and you bite into it, you expect that little bit of sweetness. So I think people automatically equate that if a wine is fruity, it must also be sweet. And in wine, that's not true at all. Wine can be super fruity, but completely bone dry. So what I need for you to think of as if you were drinking water, so no sweetness, or if you were having lemonade, which is loaded with sugar, or soda or something like that, or maybe like Sprite. All right. So one is going to be obviously sweet and the other is not. And so in this case, I feel this wine is dry. All right. It's very fruity, but it's dry. So it's a good example of that. I feel like the palate also confirms all of the fruits that we had on the nose. So I'm tasting that lime, that passion fruit, the white grapefruit. I might even throw in here green apple and gooseberry, something on that order. But again, both ripe and tart. But kind of on the finish, let's maybe take a taste again and see what we think there. All right, so I think it finishes both, to be frank and honest with you. I can't really say one wins out over the other. And we're going to talk about this when we reveal what the wine is. And so fruit condition is fresh and ripe, but with that touch of tartness from the citrus fruit. I might just mention again about some kind of crushed white rock, maybe like some limestone or even like something like gravel. There's really not a vegetal character to the wine. It's this driven by fruit. I'm not getting herbal notes. I'm not getting like forest floor. And tasting the wine, it does not taste like vanilla, clove, cinnamon, baking spices, cardamom, any of that. So I'm going to have to say this probably just was done in stainless steel or cement or some, very inert, non-reactive container, right? Uh, and so on to the palate now, the structure part, the second part. So phenolic bitterness, everybody asks me all the time, what is phenolic bitterness? And I will tell you to go out and get a bottle of Pinot Grigio and just wait to see what happens when you drink one on the finish. As you just sit there, like, I haven't touched this wine now in, I don't know, I can ramble and rave, so a minute and a half, whatever it may be. And so there's slight phenolic bitterness, there's some bitterness, and I always get it in the very back of my palate. But again, this may be different for you and where you sense things on your like tongue. So tannin, we don't have to worry about. That's a phenomenon for red wine. We'll talk about that when we get there. Now, the acid is what makes your mouth water, okay? And so I always go by the 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, on up to 5 Mississippi rule. So if my mouth kind of stops watering at 1 Mississippi, that would be a low acid wine. And by the way, if you ever find one of those, just push the glass away and walk away because you don't want to drink a low acid wine. All right. Probably the least you're ever going to get is like medium minus. So that would be 2 Mississippi. Medium acid would be 3 Mississippi if your mouth after 1 Mississippi, 2, and 5 Mississippis would be high acidity. And I can tell you right now, my mouth is still watering because I haven't tasted this in 120 Mississippis now, and I've still got watering going on my palate. So I would definitely say this is a high acid wine. Alcohol, that's when you taste it, or if you're spitting it out, like a lot of the Psalms like to do the breathe out and feel the heat. But like you'll feel that heat like in your upper chest if it's a high alcohol wine. Whereas, if it's less alcohol, like some of the Rieslings from Moselle can be 8% alcohol, and yet some of the Zinfandels and Amarones can be anywhere from 15.5 to even 17%. So you're talking even more than double. So you definitely feel that heat right here in your chest in a different way. And I have to tell you, I feel this is probably just medium alcohol. I know what the wine is, obviously, but I didn't look necessarily at what the alcohol was, but I feel this is a solid medium. It's not so low that it tastes like I'm drinking Dole fruit juice cocktail, but it's also not high and causing that heat. All right. Then body, this is medium bodied, texture, creamy, round, lean. There's kind of a roundness going on in the middle of my tongue. Like after I first tasted it, it kind of gets creamy and fills up my mouth. There are other wines that when you taste them, like Riesling wants to just, I guess I'm telling you this isn't not Riesling, but it wants to just shoot down your palate, like without lingering in your cheeks and your gums. And so again, that's something you need to find as you taste, like again, it becomes a matter of paying attention and becoming aware. And once you know, but nothing, the acid is high, the fruitiness dominates in this wine. And I say this is probably like, medium plus finish. Really like this wine. Complexity, well, if we had talked about all kinds of, forest floor and mushroom and herbal notes and the minerality and all, but we didn't mention a whole lot of those things. We talked about fruit and we talked about there wasn't any oak. So complexity on this wine, medium, because the more things you have to talk about, the more complexity the wine has. So now we get to the initial conclusion. And by the way, we're not going to be here for hours and hours talking about these 3 wines. The first wine obviously is going to take the longest because we kind of have to go through this grid. But for the initial conclusion, we want to think about possibly what grape varietals these can be. And sometimes it's easier to figure out what they're not, what they cannot be. So just looking at our great possibilities that we have Albarino, and maybe some of you have had Albarino before, maybe some not. There's Chenin Blanc from France, Gewürztraminer, Torrentes, Viognier, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, Riesling, and Sauvignon Blanc. All right, so some of these grape varietals are very aromatic and some are not. So for me, right off the bat, Pinot Gris and Chardonnay are probably going to come off the table because they're not that aromatic. All right. Now and I think I'd also take Chenin Blanc off for that reason. It can have a little bit of floral character, but it would not be this kind of fruit to it. So we've got 3 grapes off the table right away. We already talked about the Riesling. We did not have that certain chemical that I mentioned that did not smell like pool toy. This is not low alcohol, and it doesn't have any sweetness to it. So bye-bye, Riesling. Okay. And then Torrentes, Gewürztraminer, and Viognier are super aromatic, but they're really highly florally aromatic. In fact, I always like to say Gewürztraminer smells like funeral parlor flowers and like in a hot climate. If you imagine, like New Orleans in the 1860s where they've got the flowers and, and just so that magnolia and just these luscious blossoms. So what does everybody think this wine is? Nick, have you been paying attention to all the discussion?
I have, yeah.
Okay. So has anybody got any thoughts as to what this wine might be?
Crickets.
Crickets. Everybody's being shy. All right. So the wine that you have in your glass is Dashwood Sauvignon Blanc, and this is from New Zealand, Marlborough, New Zealand to be specific. It's a 2019. They're in the Southern Hemisphere, so they get their wines out ahead of us in the Northern Hemisphere. So again, very youthful and fresh, and just absolutely delicious. It's made by Vavasour, and we actually pour this by the glass on our wine list here at Angelina's. So absolutely delicious. That is absolutely a textbook example of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And Sauvignon Blanc is one of those grapes that people either totally, totally love it or totally, totally hate it. There's not like, I'm okay with it. Yeah, people feel very strongly about this particular grape. All right.
What about typical characteristics of Sauvignon Blanc?
Yeah, so Nick just had a good point. What about typical characteristics of Sauvignon Blanc? So I mentioned that you can get these, and Sauvignon Blanc can be difficult to pinpoint where it's from because it's got both that ripe fruit and that green fruit. So being able to tell exactly where it's from. So in fact, for testable here, you have United States, California. You've got the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and then you also have Sancerre in the Loire Valley in France, and then white Bordeaux. And so these 4 are kind of quite different. And for me, like we mentioned about the passion fruit in this one. So like New Zealand, in addition to the green fruit, has the papaya and the passion fruit. Then if it's from Napa Valley, it tends to take on more of a stone fruit tone for me, and it can have oak in it in Napa Valley. So if you'd had a Sauvignon Blanc with some oak, we're kicking New Zealand out the door because that would not be classic in New Zealand. In New Zealand, they like to use stainless steel or concrete tanks. Then for France, we've got Sancerre in the Loire Valley, and we have white Bordeaux. So again, if we detect that there's oak in it, this is Bordeaux, all right? And it wouldn't be brand new oak. It would definitely be some used barrel. And if there's no oak, then it would be Sancerre. And I had mentioned about the papaya and passion fruit and then peach tones. When you get to white Bordeaux, because it's actually allowed to be a blend, so a blend between Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel. And They can vary the amounts of those. So these other grapes tend to lend other flavors. And my good friend Milan, he always says that it smells like white Bordeaux smells like celery soda or celery salt or celery seed even. And so it has a different characteristic to it as well. And then Sancerre, I feel, is totally dominated more towards the white grapefruit. You might have a touch of stone fruit, but it would be the underripe stone fruit, so like white peach and that sort of thing. So there are varying shades. Can some of the, we all groaned when we were tasting 2015 Sancerre because it was such a warm vintage there that they would fool us, and these green notes would be gone, and so we were calling things like Albarino and all kinds of other varietals because it just was not typical for Sauvignon Blanc to taste like that from Sancerre, but it was such a hot vintage for them, and so we happily passed beyond 2015 Sauvignon Blanc. So, all right. Uh, so on to wine number 2. So our second wine, we already mentioned that this was darker, deeper in color. This also appears like I'm looking actually at my deductive tasting format here, and I can clearly read this through this pretty easily. If you want to think about something hazy, think about like a wheat beer from Germany. That's hazy. All right, you wouldn't be able to read through that. So we mentioned that this also has a little bit deeper concentration. The color is more towards the gold. Am I getting any secondary tints to this wine? So things like, am I seeing like some green reflections or some silver reflections? And I want to say I'm getting a little bit of green to it, but I could be fooled. And the tints are a little bit more difficult because where I'm sitting here in the garden room, I'm sorry, the private dining room, we are out by our garden. So I've got lots of green things there, and I've got a little pretty foxtail fern right outside the door here. So it might be just reflecting from that. So not truly the wine, but hard to say. So we'll just keep that in the back of the noggin. So there is rim variation to this. It's slight, so a little bit to a watery meniscus. We don't have to worry about staining, tearing. Tearing is, yeah, how quickly the tears fall down the glass, and just medium, nothing like. And I don't see any gas in this. Sometimes you don't see it, but you can taste it. So we're going to go ahead and smell the wine. All right. So again, I pronounce this wine clean, clean and sound. I am not getting, there's no cork taint to this wine. There's no volatile acidity. There's none of the dirty barn from the Brett that I'm getting. And might there be a little bit of oxidation? Perhaps more than the first wine. Again, oxidation is hard to pinpoint, and you'll just need to pay attention. Like if you open a 10-year-old bottle of wine, pay attention to how the flavors and the aromas have changed as opposed to like a newer bottle of the same varietal. So yeah, so intensity, it's not as powerful as that first one. Like I don't just smell this one coming out of the glass. I have to be smelling, uh, is it low intensity? I don't think so. I'm definitely smelling things. There are some wines where it's like you just want to scratch your head and go, I don't know. I got nothing. Um, so fruit here, we are much more towards the pomaceous fruit. So we have yellow apple and pear and yeah, and I'm even gonna call yellow apple. This isn't green apple. This is a little riper. Yeah, it was pretty. And there's other things like the first wine was fruit, and I'm done. And this wine has a little bit more going on to it. So I'm going to take a little bit more care when I go through the non-fruit thing. So am I smelling any kind of? I don't really get floral notes to this, but am I getting some herbs? Yes. So I'm trying to think like because I always like to think when I get to the green notes, like am I in a farm garden or am I in a forest, walking through a forest? And this is much more farm garden for me. So maybe some things like basil or even slight sage or oregano note to it. So just to add some complexity, I would say I can get some mushroom on this. And as far as minerality goes, I would have to say like turned earth or potting soil kind of note. Um, and and it's hard when you get to mineral because we kind of have, well, and by we I don't mean me, but scientists have kind of concluded that we actually cannot detect the soils that the grapes are grown in. Some we still kind of oh, it's slate soil for Riesling and it's chalk for Chablis, and it's just kind of shown that we're not really detecting that. That may be more to the organisms that live in the soil that we're attributing to that. There are certain minerals, so like chalk, you can actually lick a piece of chalk and see what that tastes like. You can strike flint and smell that. But yeah, to actually go lick rocks, you're not going to pick up any, oh, this rock tastes like limestone. It just doesn't work that way. So for us to say that, but there are some things that you can smell. So think of like that are mineral driven. So think about after, especially for us here in Florida, you go out walking after the afternoon thunder shower, and so the heat and the moisture coming up off of the sidewalk, that pavement smell, that's actually a chemical compound called petrichor. And so you can actually smell that in certain wines. And like the flint, that struck flint or gun smoke kind of smell, you can smell that. You can taste chalk. But yeah, this theoretically coming up that it smells or tastes like basalt is not scientifically correct. Okay. So are we smelling oak on this wine? I want to say I don't exclude it as a possibility at this point, because do I think I'm getting some vanilla cinnamon notes? I think I might be. But is it really screaming at me? No, because I'm not even 100% certain over that. So we're going to wait till we go to taste that. So again, we're going to taste the wine. What's the first thing? Sweet or dry? So let's make that determination right off the bat. Mm. Oh, delish. Love you. Um, so this wine is also dry. This wine is very fruity, and unlike the first wine that had the green fruits to it, because we've got the riper fruits like the yellow apple and the pear. I could even see white peach here. That where you might want to tend to maybe say that it was just maybe off dry, but as you get more familiar, and like a good thing to do structure wise is to taste wines that you know have sweetness against wines that have none, or pick a high alcohol wine and taste it next to a low alcohol wine, and taste a wine with 100% new French oak and a wine with no oak, and some of those things, like it helps to sort through some of those, because again, tasting wine is not necessarily easy, because I mean, look at this grit. That's all things we have to think about when we taste these wines. So fruit character here, definitely ripe. I'd say it's pretty fresh. It doesn't taste stale in any kind of way, like where I might think that I had some age to this wine. Again, I think I'm still detecting that basil, oregano, maybe the sage has gone away a little bit. Not really floral. I guess for any white wine, you could say but that you got some white blossom or something, and you would not probably be incorrect. And earth, again, the earth here, though, I said about turned earth and potting soil, and it smelled some of that. But for me now, I'm kind of getting this little, like where it feels like it's kind of coating the top of my tongue. So I'm going to go with some kind of crushed rock, limestone, chalk kind of soil. And as far as oak goes, I think there may be some older used barrel, not large barrel. It doesn't taste like that. If you've ever had like Nebbiolo or Barbaresco, where they use these giant old used tanks, not tanks, they're barrels, but they're the size of tanks, that it gives a sour note to the wine. Kind of, I don't know, it's kind of off-putting, like maybe like a damp basement kind of soury smell. But that I don't really get here. Am I sure? It might just be that the fruit, because it's that apple, I'm wanting to pair it with cinnamon. So I would have to say I think there's maybe some used barrel to that. So anyway, so now we've got to come up with our structure. So we mentioned that the wine was dry. Acid, probably not as much acid as that first one. That was a lot of acid in that first wine. High acid is a good thing. It makes a particular wine a great food pairing partner. I would say this wine is about a step down from that. So maybe like moderate plus. Alcohol, I feel that's also pretty moderate. Like I would be guessing something around 13.5. We didn't look at what the dashwood was, but we'll take a look at that in a second. And body, this is fuller bodied than the Sauvignon Blanc. It's got some more roundness and some richness to it. And I don't know, something sexy about this wine. And texture, I would definitely call this creamy and round. It's definitely got that going on. I don't really feel anything dominates in this wine. I feel like overall, like we mentioned, the acid and the fruit dominated in the last wine. I feel like this is pretty well-rounded wine. And length, I'm going to call this medium plus, and complexity would definitely be medium plus. We talked about way more things in this wine than we did in the first one. So initial conclusion. So we've got a wine that may have oak on it. And so when we think about using oak, because we're Americans and we're used to drinking California and Oregon, where these winemakers use lots of oak, lots of new oak, and lots of oak. Oak barrels are really super expensive. So there's not a lot of places in the rest of the world that they can afford to use an oak barrel as part of a particular regimen. It would have to be for their top of the line killer screamer wines. So like even if you think about Malbec in Argentina, a lot of the lower end Malbecs do not use any oak at all. They might use some used barrels, but yeah, it's generally reserved for the top of the line. So places where they do use oak, we mentioned California, Oregon, definitely in Bordeaux and in Burgundy, both in France. New oak is not really used for whites in Italy too much, nor is it in Germany or Spain. So we kind of got United States and France. And then there's just some grape varietals that they don't use with oak. We had already mentioned about the California Sauvignon Blanc and the Bordeaux from France, that they could use oak on their wines, but not a lot. So, all right. And then Viognier can see new oak. Chardonnay can see new oak, or oak usage. I shouldn't, because I don't know. I detect new oak on this wine. And then the rest of the suspects that are on this list generally do not. So I think we've honed ourselves down to Chardonnay, Viognier, and Sauvignon Blanc. And climate here, like again, we're not getting that green fruit, but I don't have tropical fruit either. So I would have to go with this as a pretty moderate climate. And do I think this is old world or new world? So let's take a taste again. All right. For me, it went on the palate, and it was the yellow pear and yellow apple. But on the palate, I feel it finishes a little tartar. But I will tell you that this wine's trickier. All right. People always talk about that, oh, it's New World if it's fruity, and it's Old World if it's mineral driven and other things in the wine. And to some extent, that's true, but the condition of the fruit is really what should drive you. And I will tell you right now, I'll be honest with you, this is not the easiest one to get. as far as to figure out old world, new world. So possible countries, I think we kind of honed it down to France and United States. In age range, we mentioned there might be just the slightest bit of oxidation, but if you were to go get a 10-year-old bottle of this particular varietal and taste it against the vintage that we're drinking here, there would be night and day. So again, that's another important exercise for you to try at home. I know I'm giving you drinking homework. Oh, poor you. All right, so final conclusion. So what does everybody think that this wine is? Any thoughts, or are we going to have more crickets?
We have someone guessing if it's Regaliali.
Oh.
We have someone guessing if it's Lugana.
Uh-huh. All right. Okay, so we have to stick with our testable grape varietals, and as much as I love Tenuta Regaliali, Tascadal Merita, none of their grapes, they don't grow any of these things that we get to see here, and they wouldn't be from regions that would be testable. So I'm sorry, we have to rule that out. Lugana would be closer because we do have Pinot Grigio that comes from the Veneto. But this wine is actually Chardonnay. So this is Louis Jadot, Macon Village, and it is 2018. And I think it's either used barrel or there's no oak on this wine. But just really pretty wine, very well balanced, and it had that nice richness of Chardonnay. So for me, Chardonnay, boy, I love when I get a table that says I don't like Chardonnay. Oh, really? Okay. Because have you had every one? There's so Chardonnay. Okay, first of all, the grape itself is just okay. You can see this beautiful painting behind me there. Vanna, use your right hand. But you can see this painting behind me, and so it's very intricate and all kinds of details and everything like that. There are some grapes that are like that you want that to shine when it gets to the winery. There are some grapes like Chardonnay that are basically a blank canvas. Okay, they don't have a lot to give you, so the winemaker takes more of a hand in things. So may use things like lees stirring and malolactic fermentation and oak. And so again, Chardonnay is a great world traveler. It just goes everywhere. It doesn't mind anything. It can be hot, cold. It's the opposite of bratty little Pinot Noir. All right. So Chardonnay, we find it in almost every country where wine is made. They certainly grow it in Italy, in Spain, in France, in the United States, in all of South America, and New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. So it just goes everywhere. But there's all kinds of different styles depending on climate and what the winemaker does to it. So just to give a blanket statement that you don't like Chardonnay, you're doing a disservice to the grape, okay? Because we have styles such as Chablis, which are dry. They don't see oak. The climate is so cool up there that so the wines are crisp, high acid, tart, green, lots of chalky minerality, just beautiful, beautiful wines. They're just exquisite and divine. It's like drinking flat champagne, but better than flat champagne. Yeah, Nick says good call. But then we have where Chardonnay gets super, super ripe, like Russian River Valley in Sonoma in California. It gets so ripe that it gets these, like it smells like pineapple and banana. And if the winemaker decides to slap 100% new French oak on it or and give it malolactic treatment, which malolactic fermentation makes it smell like that buttery kind of smell. So you feel like you're drinking a glass of the buttered popcorn at the movie theater. And so I can see like where someone might not like one style and might totally prefer another, but there's way, way different styles made. And so you need to give Chardonnay another try if you think you don't like it. So any other questions I need to go over, Mr. Nick?
Well, shout out to Paul Garfold who guessed it right. So come on down, Paul.
Oh, way to go, Mr. Garfold. Yeah. Yes, good, good. Okay, so we're on to red. Oh, I thought about this earlier. I wanted to mention about like when you put your wine into your face, okay, as I keep saying, um, like what's with all the like gargling with it and the people that and do all these things. Why are you doing that? Okay, well, I don't do the sucking air thing. There are people that do that. I tend to not be very graceful, and so that and I end up dirtying up my clothes, and I love my clothes, so I don't want to dirty things up. So I do like to swirl it all around in my palate so that it hits every part of my mouth. So including the insides of your cheeks, your gums, your tongue, the top, the roof of your mouth, everywhere, even underneath my tongue, because again, the you actually have taste buds not only in your tongue, you have some that are located on the roof of your mouth, and yeah, it's like your mouth is both a disgusting and an amazing place. But so anyway, that's the reason for that. Yeah. So, um, but yeah, so we have some of these things that we do for a reason. It's not to look like we're acting snobby and we know more than you do. Don't ever let anybody tell you, that a wine you're not drinking that you like is not good, or unless it's night train or something like that. But yeah, if you like it, great, it's yours. All right. So on to wine number 3. So we now have a red wine. Yay. Okay. So this wine, we're going to look through it. Now, this gets more interesting, okay, with the reds because the color immediately when you look, so you're not going to have smelled it or tasted it or anything. And immediately you can rule about 50% of your possible grape varietals out. That's great, right? Because it really helps you. It's like we mentioned about being the police detectives, and you get to knock out all kinds of people on your suspect list and really focus. All right. So we're going to look at this, and so looking through my wine, I can see my finger through this wine. All right. Super, super light red wines. You could maybe see the wrinkles in your knuckle. All right. This one I can't quite see the wrinkles in my knuckle, but I can definitely make out my finger and the nail and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to probably call this about, we'll call this medium minus concentration. All right. And you can have lower than that. But again, it's not going from water to, full on color. So this one, we mentioned the other two were completely clear. This one is a little hazier. Like if I'm looking at the words on this deductive tasting format, they're a little fainter, and it's not due to the color. It's that there's just a very slight haze in this wine. So what does the haze tell us? Well, it tells us that the wine maybe has not been filtered or fined, and so that they chose to leave some particles in there. And there's you'll have one winemaker tell you that, oh yes, I never filter or fine my wines because it strips the wines of lots of beautiful properties. And then there are other people that tell you exactly the opposite, that I don't want to leave spoilage bacteria. And so is either one of them correct and the other one wrong? No. How's the wine taste? How's it age? How do you like it? So that's the most important thing. So, but anyway, so just to note that there is perhaps a slight bit of haziness here. Now, color for red wines. So you have to decide, okay, and I always tell my staff this, is it red or is it purple? Red or purple? And then we'll go from there, but red or purple. That's not to say it can't be both, but that also would be a clue. So looking at this wine, what do you think? It's red. It's ruby. This is ruby colored wine. This is the perfect definition of ruby. Okay. We don't use terms like brick because if you think about brick houses, bricks range in color from everything to beige to red to garnet to it can be the color brick can be a million things. So we just prefer to say garnet if you detect any kind of orange color to this wine. I don't at all. And secondary colors, generally going to see more of those in red wines. And again, I mentioned I don't really see garnet here. It goes to a kind of a thin, watery meniscus, but overall just this pretty ruby color. Now staining, we're going to look, since we've got a red wine, we're going to look for staining. And you kind of want to, you can hold it up and check it against the light or sunlight. And so while I do have tearing, I don't have staining. All right, so yeah, important to know the difference there. So, and I'm not seeing any gas here. So on the nose. All right, so my usual suspects. This wine is not corked. Hopefully none of you got a corked wine. If you did, just let us know. We'll give you another bottle. There's this does not smell like a dirty barn, so there's no breath there. This smells pretty youthful and fresh. The fruits smell fresh and ripe, so I'm not going to call any oxidation on this wine. Yeah, and so how intense is it? Well, I got to say I would call this moderate plus. I do feel that that's moderate and plus. It kind of comes out of the glass, but yeah, very pretty. Youthful and fruit here. So we're going to skip down from the white fruit to the red. So again, the fruits for reds, we're going to pick three things. You've got to decide. Is it red fruit? Is it black fruit? Or is it blue fruit? So red fruit would be the most like coolest climate, the most underripe fruit. Black fruit falls in the middle. We're definitely getting to warmer, hotter climates here. And then blue fruit is like where we are over the top. So places that get very warm, so like Barossa or Southern Rhone, Spain, catch a lot of blueberry fruits in some of their wines because again, related to climate. Now, can you have both red and black fruit? You sure can. Okay. Bordeaux is a great example of that. And so Merlot, which may be more red fruit driven, and you've got Cabernet, but they make blends. So then you can have the two of them together. Southern Rhone, you can have blends of all three of the fruit profiles because you're growing 13 different grape varietals and you're using some of them and blending some and picking some earlier and picking some later. And so, yeah, definitely is possible to have combinations of those or even all three. So, yeah, so on this one, what you smelling? I feel like there's just lots of red fruit coming out here. Even like strawberry, red cherry, definitely that like red cherry, like where it's a snappy red cherry, and maybe even some raspberry notes. But the fruit's very pretty, and if you put a bowl of that fruit in front of me, I would want to eat it. It would be delicious. All right, fruit character. This smells ripe, fresh. I don't think I'd go so far as to make it jammy, but it is definitely ripe and fresh. And then are we getting, we might be getting some floral notes on this wine. So maybe something like a little bit of lavender or lilac, but it's pretty, but it's not overpowering. There are some wines that you pick them up and you're like, holy Moses, did somebody just set 12 dozen, pink roses in front of my face? And because it's how powerful sometimes the floral notes can be. And then, so are we going to call forest floor or farm garden on this one? And I feel like we're still wandering around the farm garden. I might have things like thyme, maybe a touch of rosemary, like even tomato or geranium leaf. Uh, it's pretty. It just adds another layer to the wine. I'm not getting like I see this animal barn kind of thing. If I were to call it, I would call it, yeah, forest floor. In fact, there's almost even like a juniper or cedar kind of note to the wine.
I get like a cola note on it.
Oh, and Nick says he gets a cola note. Oh, good clue. So, and are we detecting any oak on this wine? And again, I think possibly. But if there's new oak on this wine, there's not much of it. okay, because it's certainly not dominant in the nose. There are certain grape varietals that take very well to lots and lots of new oak, and there are certain grape varietals that do not. So, all right, on to the palate. Hmm. Well, that's scrumptious. So that wine also is dry. Yeah, and I think definitely the red fruit's coming through. We might have a little touch of black fruit here as well, maybe like some black cherry or even a touch of black plum, but definitely all of that red fruit that I talked about was there earlier. It's as if you've thrown a couple blackberries into my bowl of fruit you're setting in front of me right now. Um, Fruit character, it is ripe and fresh. It's just delicious. It's like they picked the fruit at the perfect moment. And then floral notes, yeah, a little bit of that, maybe like a lavender or lilac potpourri, like where the floral notes are maybe just a touch dried. Um, and then the herbal notes are definitely there. And yeah, even to where I might get some black licorice in addition to those herbal notes that we talked about before. Hmm. Maybe a little bit of leather as well. Yeah, it's very pretty wine. I like this. There's just yeah, the mushrooms I could see, that tomato leaf, or maybe more towards geranium leaf, and then stone is kind of what I'm envisioning is if you took one of your terracotta pots that you got flowers in, and you took a hammer to it and smashed it into a million pieces. The dust coming off of that, like clay kind of soil. That's what I'm tasting there, and on the palate. Yeah, I feel like I'm getting some French oak there, but again, this is going to be a very low percentage of it. Uh, I wouldn't even I wouldn't even think maybe this was as high as 20% New French oak. Um, yeah, there's kind of a drying little note here. So let's talk about the structure. So phenolic bitterness is what we talk about for whites. So tannin. Okay, there's some tannin on this wine. Tannin is drying, and acidity makes your mouth water. And so, guess what? It's not fair because in wine, you can have both the tannin and the acid in the same wine. So, one's going to dry your palate, and one's going to make your mouth water. So, how are you to decide that? So, I don't know. Tannins, for me, they dry my tongue out, and acidity, I feel my mouth watering on the sides. So I've got both of those things going on right now. Like where it's when you first taste the wine, like it's so drying that your tongue almost wants to stick to the roof of your mouth, and yet there's all this acid on the side. So both of those. Uh, Now, anybody that's had Barolo or Barbaresco, the Nebbiolo has some screaming, raging tannins, like where you would call those high. They're just high. They can't be anything else. Like your gums even stick to your teeth, and you have a hard time talking. And this, okay. So I think I could call this anywhere from medium to medium plus tannin. Acid is also up there too. So this is medium plus acid because my mouth is still watering. Uh, Alcohol, I think we're a little higher than the other two. And I said we were going to look at those, and we'll do that. Nick will remind me. Okay. So when we're finished, so that I can look at what the alcohols are. So body, I think I want to say medium to medium plus. It's kind of full and rich on the palate, right? Um, and texture, this is round. Um, I don't feel like anything really dominates in this wine. I feel like this wine is very balanced. And finish, I'll call that medium plus, and complexity, but that's medium plus. So now we're to initial conclusion. So the grape varietals that we've got, I mentioned that color would rule out about half of them. So in Grapeland, we have thick skin. I know I keep putting my hands up, but like, okay. But so we have thick skin grape varietals and we have thin skin grape varietals. And so your thick skin grape varietals, exactly what they imply. So they're going to impart a ton of color. And so because all the coloring pigments are in the skins. The pulp inside the grape itself doesn't have any color. It's all comes from the skins. Then your thin skin grape varietals, they hardly have any of these coloring pigments or anthocyanins to be extracted. So if you, okay, I guess I'll be showing myself up again, but okay, so if you're going to make your own strawberry flavored vodka, so you're going to buy the strawberries, you're going to dump it in the vodka, and you're going to let the alcohol suck the color out of the grapes. Okay. And when the strawberries turn white, you can pitch them, and now your vodka is flavored pink. Um, so same thing happens with wine. As you crush the grapes for the red wine, you let them ferment on their skins, and as the alcohol builds up, it sucks the color out of the grape skins. So again, these thinner skin grape varietals, they don't have a lot of color to give, whereas the thick skin grape varietals, they do. And those wines can even get like so dark that they're almost black in color. So again, color is important here because when we're talking about, remember I said red or purple? Purple tends to be the family where maybe the darker skin grape varietals, and the red tends to be the thinner skin grape varietals. So looking at our list that we've got here, so off to your left, you've got Gamay, Grenache, Nebbiolo, and then down on the bottom, paired together, you got Sangiovese, Tempranillo, and right above it is Pinot Noir. Those 6 are the thin skin grape varietals that are testable. All right. So the other ones, Malbec can be very, very purple. Zinfandel can be very, very purple. Syrah, very, very purple. Merlot, a little more touch red. And Cabernet can be red, but most likely purple. All right. So these darker colors. So we mentioned this one was red. We could see our finger through it. So that's the other thing. Those thicker skin grape varietals, the color gets so deep and dark that you would not be able to even see your finger through the wine that we had in the glass when we did the little finger test before. And like I said, I can see my finger. I can see the nail on my finger. We call this medium minus opaque. And so so I think we can take Malbec, Zinfandel, Syrah, Merlot, and Cab Sauv off the table. So 5 of those right away. And that was before we ever smelled or tasted the wine inside the glass. So that's kind of amazing that we can narrow it down that quickly. So I had mentioned while I was talking about the wine about Nebbiolo have tannins that can rip your face off. Nebbiolo is definitely a food wine. It's high everything. It's high tannin, high alcohol, and high tannin, high alcohol, and high acidity. And this wine was not that. We had medium to medium plus tannin, medium to medium plus alcohol, and medium plus acidity. So that would not be Nebbiolo. All right. And then tasting the wine, we need to figure out, do we think it's old world or new world? So condition of the fruit, that's ripe. Finish is ripe. So that means by the same token, we can take off Sangiovese and Tempranillo. All right. Grenache can come from the New World in Australia, but Gamay's got to come off the table because that's from France. So that leaves us with Grenache and Pinot Noir. And I'm actually very good. So in your initial, you would definitely want to list those 2 grape varietals because in case you call the wrong one in your final, you would still get some credit for at least having the sense enough to put those 2 things together. So I will tell you that the difference between Grenache and Pinot Noir, Grenache has much more of a candied fruit flavor, like where it's fake fruit, and maybe with cinnamon red hots thrown into the wine and let dissolve. Not sweet, not the sweetness, but that cinnamon kind of flavor. And Pinot Noir, I don't know, generally tends to have a little bit better of a pedigree because I mentioned it is a bratty little grape child and throws itself to the floor and has a tantrum. If it's too hot or it's too cold or it's too wet or it's too dry, and mommy, it's just got to be just right. And so it generally is only planted where it will do well. A lot of these other grapes, like Cabernet Sauvignon is the the guy with the stick, with the handkerchief, whatever, wandering around the world. He's like Johnny Appleseed. He can just go anywhere. You can plant Mr. Cabernet Sauvignon anywhere you want to. But Pinot Noir is much more fussy. So, final conclusion. Again, we thought this wine was pretty youthful. So the great reveal. So this wine is Picket Fence Pinot Noir, and this is from Sonoma. I'm sorry, Russian River Valley Pinot Noir. The vintage is 2017. We also happen to pour this wine by the glass here at Angelina's. Alcohol a little lower than what I was thinking. I would have thought maybe this is like 13.8. It's 13.5. Okay, so horrifying story, but true. Whatever alcohol is listed on here, you would think that that would have to be actually what it was. But guess what? It's not. Here in the United States, if it says 13.5 alcohol, it could be anywhere from 12 to 15%. You're allowed a 1.5% leeway either side. Yeah. In Europe, you're only allowed a 0.5 percentage point leeway either side. So, again, so who knows? But at least you do have that on the bottle. I would tend to trust the people that have 14.79% alcohol because, wow, then you're really good at making stuff up. Okay, the Macon Village Chardonnay is 12.5. I thought that was a little higher as well. I thought that was around 13.5, I believe I said. And then Dashwood is 13. So it had more alcohol than the Louis Jadot. So sometimes you get tricked, and it's not as easy as you possibly even think it could be. But so there it is. But so how did everybody do? Did you have fun? What all did we? So we know Mr. Garfield got the Chardonnay. How about anybody else? Did anybody else call the Pinot Noir? Do you have any questions about blind tasting? And again, crickets. Nick, do you have any thoughts?
Well, you talked about the thin-skinned grape varietals and how they could be on site confused. How would you differentiate a grape like Nebbiolo to Pinot Noir on the palate?
Okay, yeah. He asked for the thin-skinned grape varietals, how would you go about differentiating those different varietals? Because you've determined in the glass like that it's not going to be Cabernet and it's not going to be Syrah or Zinfandel. So what are the characteristics that set those apart? And so again, I mentioned Nebbiolo is high everything. It's light in color, but it's high in structure. All right. Gamay, which is the grape of Beaujolais, you can confuse a lot with Pinot Noir. They're grown very close together, although Gamay can be purple in color, but it will be very light, even lighter than this Pinot Noir. And it will tend to, because they use a special production method in it called carbonic or semi-carbonic maceration. So it tends to take on, people say, like bubblegum or pear drop kind of notes. It's just something that's very peculiar to that wine. And then Pinot Noir just tends to have this elegance to it. It is a very noble grape varietal. In fact, Pinot Noir is the parent to many, many grapes in Burgundy. And so we know that Pinot Noir is an older grape varietal. And so it's gone through many mutations, and we don't even know who its parent is. It's that old of a grape varietal. Grenache, like I mentioned, now this is grown in the southern Rhone, and it tends to have for me that like the alcohol is just going to be screaming, raging high, but the cinnamon note, and there's something fake about the fruit. So think about the difference between a real lemon and smelling lemon pledge. Okay, there's difference, and or a lemon and a lemon drop candy. Yeah, just something like, or a lemon jelly belly jelly bean. There's just something not right about it because they can't quite get the lemon flavor. Then Sangiovese and Nebbiolo both can be one confused for the other. But again, Nebbiolo, just the tannin, the acid, the alcohol, they all went out, whereas Sangiovese is just less than all those things. And the other thing that I can tell apart, well, maybe I have a great foot up because I work in an Italian restaurant, is because I get to try lots of Sangiovese and Nebbiolo. And so for me, there's something so savory about Sangiovese. You'll find me talking about tomato leaf and almost like where you can smell like balsamic vinegar on Sangiovese, whereas Nebbiolo, yes, it's tart and it can be sour from the used barrel and it's got all this tannin and all this stuff going on, but there's something almost like cocoa powder. So one's so super savory and the other one kind of has this, and I can't say sweetness, but less of a savory character. And yeah, so it makes it something to stand out. And then there's Tempranillo. All right, so Tempranillo is grown in Rioja and Ribera de Duero in Spain, and also a couple other regions, but in Spain it's testable in Rioja and Ribera de Duero. Now, Tempranillo can be really, really hard because if it's from Ribera de Duero, it's so hot there that the grapes get super ripe and they can get a little more color out of them. And so some of them can be quite dark in color. And then Rioja, there's it's also allowed to blend like with Garnacho, which is Grenache from Southern Rhone, and some other grape varietals. And so again, does that affect the color and the taste? And so it varies from producer to producer because some producers in Rioja use brand new French oak, but what has been traditional is to use American oak. And American oak has a completely different profile from French oak. American oak smells like dill and jalapeno and like pickle bucket and coconut, shaved coconut. Whereas French oak, we had mentioned, had the vanilla, baking spices, clove, all those sorts of things, even cocoa powder. So again, if you're getting different fruit profiles on it, if you get American oak, yay, because thank you. But so again, you have to taste things that have producers that use American oak versus producers that use French oak. To again, another homework assignment you have to be tasting wine at home. But yeah, so those are some differences between those. So
I like Barb's comment that she just posted. About,
okay, yeah, and certainly we can do that upcoming. Miss Garfold put that it would be fun to compare the same varietal from 3 different regions, and it is very instructive. And in fact, our blind tasting group, sometimes we don't do blind tasting. Everybody will bring in a couple wines, and so like we did not too long ago before the whole coronavirus, but we did where everybody brought in Chardonnays, and so we had some from Chablis and some from Burgundy and some from Macon Village, and then we had some from Australia and some from California and different parts of California, and just to taste the differences between all of them. And so it was amazing because I thought I was so good at knowing what Chardonnay tasted like, and I'm like, well, maybe I just am trying to, uh, jam the round peg into the square hole, the square peg into the round hole, whatever the phrase may be. But yeah, it is very helpful and instructive to do that because you can literally see the differences, and so differences in alcohol and acidity and what climate does to the grapes. And so yeah, that's a very good suggestion. So, all right. Anyone else have any other questions? I hope you all enjoyed the wines. And certainly we look forward to seeing everybody on Friday. Marcello's fan club has all signed up. And so we're very excited because we will be open here at Angelina's. We open again on Thursday, 2 days from now on May 7th. Again, if you'd like to make a reservation, please do. Our telephone number is 239-390-3187. But Marcello and I have decided that since the restaurant will be open and we will be needing all of our 25% capacity, that he and I are going to taste out by the fountain outside. So yes, it will be a very pretty view out there for the two of us to taste. He's picked out some great wines, and so very much looking forward to that. Chef Ryan is going to be making burrata with eggplant caponata for your tasting portion of that. And then don't forget the following Friday. we have our virtual wine dinner. This is the first one of those we're ever doing. And so we're going to pair 3 wines with 3 courses from Chef Ryan. And we will have Alessandro Celai from Castellari and another winery here at 5. I'm sorry, that one's at 6:30. And so he will be coming to us live from Sicily via, technology, which is great. And so he will be discussing all of his wines, and we'll be tasting along with the food. So please, we look forward to seeing you here again in the future. We're very excited that we're going to be seeing our guests in person again, and yeah, just very happy about all of it. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks so much. Bye now.